finally. Oh, hey everybody, welcome. Sorry we're 3 minutes late. My computer said it needed to update the firmware, and it took for freaking ever. So I had to get my other computer. So sorry about that. We're gonna be talking about, is it time to sell or not? So it's something that all three of us get that question quite a bit. So we'll dive into that. We've got some stories to talk about as well. And so if this is you, you're feeling burned out and you need some relief, thanks to the EO people, I got this t-shirt. And thanks to 704 Shop who printed the t-shirts. Love those guys. So before we rock, any current events that we need to be aware of, guys? Ah,
I'm gonna let Jack take this one. He's the man.
Sorry, I lost my unmute button. It just disappeared when I moved my mouse to try to find it. So, I think two things. One is that it was very interesting, I think, just reflecting kind of last week's discussion, and it continued onward throughout the past, 6, 7 days or so for me, and I think for Gary and for Adam
yeah.
on LinkedIn and otherwise. And, we've tried to be very non-political in it, but, some people just felt the need to share their political views on things, which is totally fine. What's interesting is we've had some offers to have some guest speakers that, I wouldn't say they're partisan. They're either Republican or Democrat. But, so more to come on that. I think it was a very interesting conversation that we had. And Ryan is a great guy who understands that, it wasn't the opportunity to come chat with all of us wasn't a pulpit to express his views on certain things. Not that he would do it anyway, but so, there's that. There's also what is interesting, the whole coming back to work and remote work debate continues on, and we keep hearing about, okay, well, we made this offer and they want to work from home remotely, or they want to do this and want to do that. And so interesting in drafting employment agreements and what that means in drafting those agreements. And so, and what is even more interesting, I think, is that there's no one size fits all. I think that there has been a push to say, okay, it is now in, today, the first day of summer, which is June 20th, that it is appropriate that all workers should be back in the office at least 3 days a week, if not 4, perhaps 5. There's no standard like that, as far as I can see, industry wise or profession wise or anything like that. It comes back down to what you think it would, which is culture. What is the appropriate time and method for your culture? And we'll talk about that a little bit today, because that's obviously an important part of selling a business or buying a business. But I think that is a good kind of maybe transition into what we're going to talk about today, which is the what is the best route? What are people looking for? What are buyers looking for? And a lot of times it's not, okay, a set formula. Okay, are you guys back to work 4 days a week? And if not, we're going to take a pass and go. It is, tell us about the culture. If 3 days a week works for your culture, then show us that. And that would be indicative in the or resulting in the results. You could see it in the results of the business, in the financials, I would think. So just some, again, interesting observations that are tangentially relevant to what we're going to talk about today.
Right on. Adam, before we dive into it, anything else from a current events standpoint, things that we're hearing from clients that should be mentioned?
No, really just, I mean, that really was the genesis for this topic, which is hey, I'm getting some activity in terms of people being interested. What do you think about selling, right now? So I thought it'd be a good topic to hit. Yeah, I'm and on a related note, thanks Jack for that. It's the reason I'm not on social media. So there you go. You know, I mean, I am on social media, but what that really means is Jamie's on social media. So hopefully,
Right.
you know, hopefully, because you know, it's like, you know, I could say, Gary, oh, sir, it's because I have more important things to do. No, it's because I would turn into a bat crazy, you know, you know, that whole thing that I said to Jack about I always wanted to be a lawyer. So I try to play one on TV. Like my instinctual need to prove my point would come out, and it just would not be good for anybody. So
And
just
you would feel better for a moment. You wouldn't convince anybody else because everybody's got, concrete hardened
oh yeah,
opinions.
I know. And then I'd be down at family dinner, and check. What are you doing? It's like refreshing. I mean, then I would make this justification, Jerry. This is my work. Like, don't you realize I need to engage with my audience? Like, how dare you want to have family dinner with me? I'm engaging with my constituents. Yeah, whatever. It's all a bunch of BS.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, before we launch into your part of hey, should I sell my business? I want to add one little caveat, and that's why I'm wearing this burned out t-shirt, because if you as the owner are burned out on your business, is it the time to sell? It depends, right, Jack? It depends.
Oh
We
yeah.
had a client that was a coaching client of mine, and it was before I rolled into BGW, but the owner was just burned out. He was just fried. He was done. And he had an offer, had multiple offers for about close to a fifth of what he ended up taking 5 years later. But we helped him identify what's burning you out. And there were a number of things. And we aligned his specific roles with the stuff that made him come alive. And we helped him get the right people around him that loved doing the stuff he hated doing. And man, they started just cooking with gas. And I think he actually regrets selling when he did, because it looked like, oh, storm clouds are coming. It's going to really hit our industry. And it did a little bit. But he really still, and this is what, almost 2 years later, Adam,
Mm-hmm.
he misses his team sorely. And he was doing well before. He had everything paid off anyway. Yeah, he's got some more zeros behind a one in his bank account, but it's like, man. So anyway, that's the little caveat that I'm going to put in. Hey, if you're feeling burned out and like there's like the walls are closing in, you might need somebody outside the jar. And I'm not saying us or, but find somebody to help you figure it out, because it may not be the right time. Now, Adam, let's go into, hey, storm clouds brewing, lots of volatility, somebody's knocking. How are you advising somebody?
Yeah, so good question. And it's funny because I typically always start with the topic of burnout. And I'll get into that in a second. Because I mean, if you're ready to jump off a cliff, and that's not like today, because on any given day, I'm guessing that Jack would probably jump off a cliff. This would be like I'm in a multi-year, you know, depression, family notices, and like it's all bad. Health is going to crap. Like, I mean, when you're in it, So
Yeah.
I usually start there. But what I want to do is just share my screen just to kind of get into some myths. So I did this for you, Jack. You guys should be able to see an Excel spreadsheet. All right.
Yep.
So all right, cool. Can you actually see it okay, or I need to zoom her in a little bit?
Zoom in a
That's
little
good.
more.
All right, let's see. All right. If I get rid of this, I can make it a little bit bigger. I can also stretch it too. Yay. Okay.
There you go.
There we go. All right, cool. So shockingly, this chart didn't exist. And no, I did not get ChatGPT to make it. So I made it myself. But this chart shows the S&P 500 price to earnings ratio versus private equity multiple. So the first, to get back to the
Interesting
example that Gary started the call with, which is timing, like what, I mean, depending on the news site that you read, well, actually both sides of the spectrum right now, to be nonpartisan, would say that if the other candidate is elected, you might as well just all time will cease.
Armageddon.
Yeah, history. So part of, oh my God, if this guy comes in, we're going to hell, I need to sell. If this guy comes in, we're going to hell. That just is not proven true over time, and there's been plenty of other instances. Like I remember, again, to be nonpartisan, but, and I'll actually tell you, I did not vote for Barack Obama. And I remember at the time, there was a lot of pundits that said, the country was just going to cease existing. Yet the data shows that it didn't. So that's my only point.
Yeah.
So this is the S&P 500 price to earnings ratios versus private equity multiples. And for the person scratching their head, listen to this, it's like, what actually is that? So the good question that you did not ask, but the price to earnings ratio, that's kind of the gold standard if you're a Warren Buffett follower of what's a company really worth, and it's as simple as it sounds. It's basically what is the price of the company, which in this case would be its market valuation, which would be all the shares of the stock outstanding times the current going rate of those shares, divided by what were their financial statement earnings. So price divided by earnings. It's kind of that simple. And when people talk about overvalued markets, or overvalued companies, what they're really talking about in that sense is, something is afoot, meaning like the price that people are paying relative to their earnings is just a lot higher than what people think it should be. Well, in the case of, emerging companies, so like Tesla would have been a good example. Tesla was worth more than Ford, and Tesla wasn't making any money. It's because people are betting on the future, so that can happen. I'm in my basement again today, and I am wearing a t-shirt, and I would remind everybody that, Roaring Kitty, ran up another gentleman in his basement, helped the GameStop run up, which is very similar. The price of the earnings was just out of whack, and so that's what people talk about when they talk about something is overvalued. So that's what the blue line represents. The orange line represents private equity multiples, which means, of the publicly available information that you can get on what private equity pays for companies, this is the reported multiple of earnings. So that data is available. I mean, there's companies out there that aggregate it. It's not all transactions, but if you look at, like, from my experience with the data set, if you kind of start with transactions over 25 million in enterprise value, it's a good cross section. What it's not a good cross section of is, anything in kind of the 2 million to 25 million range. I mean, there's going to be a handful that are sitting in this calculation, but it's pretty heavily skewed towards, larger companies. So my point in saying that is that, if you look at this data, you probably can't see this on the screen, but right now, in 2023, which is the last data set, the current price to earnings ratio for private equity, because it's the same concept. was 12.3. So that would imply that I have a multiple of earnings when people talk about, well, what's your EBITDA multiple when they go to sell? 12.3 was the 2023 average. I can say based on experience that no BGW client actually got that. In 2023, there are a few that came pretty close. And they were larger companies. So what I found is that this price, if I just look at the time history, this private equity multiple really is, for our size clients, is generally going to be overstated by 25 or 30% across the board. Like in any given year, it's overstated by 25 or 30% versus what people will typically get. And that meaning it's a good data point if I just lop off 25 to 30%. In other words, don't leave the conversation with, Adam Boatsman said I should get 12.3. I actually specifically did not say that. What I said is if you have an extremely well-run company that is saleable, there's a chance that you could get 75% of that as a multiple. But what I wanted to just point out though is if you just think about, hey, is it time to sell because I think the market's going to turn? What if I was to roll back even to recessionary times, it doesn't change a whole lot from a graphic standpoint. I probably should have done that in hindsight, thinking about it. But what the first thing this tells me is that, the multiples that private equity pay actually do a good job of kind of following what the price to earnings ratio does. So, if you just look at these graphs, they're roughly moving in parallel with each other, and their slope is relatively similar. With the lone exception of this spike in the price to earnings ratio in 2020 to 2021, that's the anomaly that you'll find in the price to earnings ratio, especially in recessions, or in this case, it was 2020, when we're in the middle of COVID, is that the stock market didn't go down a whole lot just because companies reported crappy income due to COVID. So if you just look at the ratio is going to be high because the price remained the same, but companies' earnings went off the cliff. Once they rebounded, again, the market still continued to go up, but once they rebounded, pretty quickly snapped. Doesn't mean the market went down. It just means the company earnings actually went up to be more in parallel with what was happening before. But as you can see, it is going down a little bit, because people generally, believe that, the market might be a little bit overvalued. But if you just look at this over 10 years, 22.82 is what it's at today, relative to over here, 17.03. I mean, that's 10 years. It hasn't changed a ton. Like when I think about change, Jack, I think like doubled, from a market timing standpoint. That's actually not what happened. And if you look at private equity multiples, kind of the same thing. 10 years ago, we're 9.5. Right now, sitting at 12.3. That's not double. So what it tells me is that if I'm trying to work on my company value, trying to time the multiple is kind of that's just not a valid thing. I need to be chasing better earnings, because again, what I would have gotten in 2013, granted right now it is more, and it could fluctuate and go back down, but that's a multiple of my earnings, and if I took that's really saying, by trying to do a timing, buying $1 million in earnings, 12 versus, whatever this is, 9.5, that's a lot, but like not the same as if I went, well, let me try to get to 2 million in earnings. So that's where I would be focused on. And from a timing perspective, in other words, like I don't see a scenario just based on history where this is going to shift a ton. In other words, like I don't particularly, even though it's real money, I don't particularly perceive, rushing into a deal, because I think multiples are going to go down materially. because they just haven't, over time. The second thing that I wanted to hit on too, from a oh my God, we're all going down in flames. Is I wanted to bring up my favorite website, Tax Foundation, tax proposals, capital gains tax. Well, that is kind of a big deal. Like that could impact my decision making, one way or the other. So, you got, under Trump, Trump elected, no change in the current policy, which would be, for most of our clients, it means the capital gains rate would be 20%, not counting the state rate. Under Biden, for most of our clients, they really would fall into this first category, which is probably going to be extraordinary rate. So in practical terms, that means that instead of paying 20% under Trump, there's a good chance you might pay 40%. And when I say a good chance, that would be, A, Biden's elected. These are your odds, right? So A, Biden's elected, B, Democrats retain control of the Senate or retain control of the Senate. C, Democrats regain control of the House, and they actually get something passed, and they make it retroactive, in terms of what they're doing. So going back to the timing, because if I pass a tax law, I can either have it go back in time, or I can have it just, hey, it's now in effect going forward. The most common scenario is that it goes forward. It doesn't look to the past. And if you look at like the last time that a capital gains tax rate increase was proposed, which is when the Senate passed the tax proposal, I want to say in 2021 or 2022, that didn't go anywhere. But they had a capital gains provision. And the view was, hey, when we said that we were going to do it, and started subjecting it to a vote, even though it hadn't passed, that was the effective date. So it wasn't an effect for the whole year, but it was an effect the day that they announced that they were going to do it, so that people weren't just sitting on the fence, like, well, I'll wait until it passes before I do anything. And that's only if it had lasted, So if I was to, do my Karnak, and you're gonna have to get us some cards, Gary, so we can start doing the great Karnak.
You're right.
Yeah, I don't know where we're at on that. So Jim, get your Starbucks card. Was a great Karnak. Yeah, there you go. The reality is, I probably would bet this million would go up a little bit, in terms of the threshold. But for most of our clients, it's actually, I mean, they'd be in the wheelhouse of a tax rate increase, under Biden. It's just that the likelihood is a little on the low side. And the other likelihood is that, it wouldn't be until 2026. So you sort of roll back to, is now the time to sell? Well, I mean, with anything, if the price is right, and you want to, then you could. But, for all practical considerations, the compelling sense of urgency, no, I don't see it. Given, meaning like, you've got a year. If you think it's time to sell, you've got, then, the sense of urgency, I think, would be, in probably late 2025, 2026, time frame would be when I would feel a sense of urgency around, like, something's going to change that's going to materially impact my net proceeds, which means that I should be getting my crap together now, which is what I should. How many times have we said you should probably get your crap together anyway, Jack?
A bazillion.
Yeah,
Many,
technical term.
many.
Yeah,
In fact, that's
many.
on my list. If we get to talk about it, like what things, reminders of what we should be doing as business owners. But yes, definitely at the top.
Yeah. So what I'll get back to is on this multiple thing then is that, and then I'll actually talk about all the stuff, and you go back to the soul crush, using Gary's example. Let me check the participants. Gary, you'll have to make sure that the people we're talking about, don't send them the link and say that you were featured. But in that scenario, he had a good transaction. Like, it was a good multiple. He had a good transaction. Younger guy, I want to say he's either when I say younger, that's all relative these days. I think he was my age or maybe I think he's a couple years younger than me. And I'm 50 for those in the audience, soon to be 51, shop early and often for the birthday gift. But his EBITDA off the top of my head was maybe a million 5 to 2 million, so remember that, for this purpose. $1.5 million to 2 million a year. And, he really just was stressed about, like, I just, I need to take some chips off the table, and, make sure my family is secure. Well, for most people, that are our clients, business owners, I mean, not that I've done a formal survey, but my informal survey is that most people would feel pretty safe if they had access to between $1 million and $2 million. Like that would provide, not that they're ready, they would be done, but it's more like, look, that would make me that's the definition of chips off the table. That if I had that liquid, I could go work I could figure out how to go work as a Walmart greeter, and still be okay. So if we go back to this guy's example, all he's got to do is save for a year. And he's there, So when you run the math on, is it time to sell or not? Every time, you're always better to keep the company if you're not burnt out, because what you're keeping are the earnings every year if you can just be disciplined about saving some portion of it. So, because effectively, what's a company buying you for? Your own money that you were making anyway. Like, at the end of the day, that's what they're buying you for, is a multiple of earnings. Well, whose earnings were they? They were my earnings. So I do feel pretty strongly about, like, look, if the whole thing I'm trying to do is wealth creation, you're actually far better off, keeping the company, getting in a good shape, and addressing the root cause of the burnout than you are selling, from a wealth perspective, because, like, the selling is kind of like I know it'll change my life. I'll move. Guess what? I came with me. Like, unless I'm going to move and I'm not coming, I'm still there. So anyway, that's what I have on my thoughts on market timing.
So I'm going to throw it back over to you, Jack, because I know you're just chomping at the bit. But I do have a funny story that I have to tell you, because it's got one of the most amazing nuggets of wisdom that I've heard from somebody that was looking to do a transaction. So they were chasing a business. They have some liquidity, kind of bored, and they very specific areas that they're looking for. So they found this one, and it's a husband and wife, and their books they were a train wreck, like a train wreck. And so one of the owners was like, hey, I want to talk with your CPA. No. And so they're just like pushing. So they said, okay, well, we'll work on that later. And they try to reassemble their books, because they're like, oh, well, just use our bank statements and blah, blah, blah. Well, needless to say, this husband and wife, they had 26 active credit cards. 26. Well, that's a red flag. Major red flag. And then they had, I mean, it's a pretty funny story from the outside going through it. But what they were doing is they were doing all this due diligence, thinking, okay, well, we're moving forward. But their CPA, who is not a CPA. They're like, hey, well, where are your tax statements from the last few years? Not there. And so, hey, I need to talk to your CPA or your tax professional, and that is in air quotes professional. So they show him tax statements that said February 2024 for 3 years, and he's like, that ain't right. Oh, well, so talking with the tax professional, well, that's just when we printed them out. Wrong. And no balance sheet, zeros. Like, I mean, I am like, dude, you just dodged a major bullet, more than a bullet. But he said, here was the learning. What I've learned is the one thing that they don't want to deal with, zero in on that up front, because that is typically where the bodies are buried. I thought, oh, that's really good. But he said, we thought, well, we're still advancing the ball. We're still moving this forward because they were anxious and we were anxious to make it happen. And he said, we were actually going backwards, because find the one thing that they are wanting to avoid, then laser in on it and don't proceed without that. So I thought that was pretty interesting, worth sharing. So Jack, Mike's yours.
I was just gonna say that, tangentially and kind of building upon all of that is with the burnout we've seen, and we kind of have put together, there are various names for it, but I would call it just kind of generically ambassador status, which is, okay, you're still the patriarch of the family, matriarch of the family, meaning the family business, the business. And that you are, as you said, extracting those things that are painful to that owner and allowing them to do what they strive at. But it has to be the right economic package for that person, because I have also seen where it's the owner says, I'm done. I see greener pastures down there. I'm going to take my money. I'm going to move. But I would, the reason I was laughing when Adam said what he said was, yeah, the only problem is I took me with me. Or I think you should trademark that and put them on shirts, and that make a fortune with that. But it is true. And so, what we've seen is, okay, also the challenge to that is that a buyer is going to want, okay, do it my way, right? And they're not going to want your influence. They will want your assistance during a transition period, but they're going to be like, okay, thanks. Well, we'll pay you out the 2 years we said, but we only really needed apparently 13 months of your time. So here you go. And so working through those kind of things. But, there is, and we've talked about this in prior discussions, what do buyers look for? And, I would go back to, we've talked about the financial health. That's what, essentially Adam was talking about at the beginning, which is, okay, what do the numbers say? What is implied in that is having your stuff together and organized. And we've said that many, many times. Whereas, okay, what do the books look like? What is the prior financial history? Is there some stability in the not just the finances, but the financial reporting and how things are treated and those kind of things. So I think that is very important, and that comes out in due diligence when there you have a prospect, a suitor that is on the line. And you talk about, okay, what is the growth potential of the business, whether with you or with someone else. And so a lot of times we see, well, that the business owner believes that there is significant growth potential. And the issue is, do I want to stay in the game to grow it and then receive something more down the road? Or am I willing to take what kind of the present value, maybe with a little bit of future value built in as the purchase price, extract myself and be like, okay, I've given someone something that they can, a platform, a base, to grow from there, and there's value in that, and I should get some of that future value, not just what the present value is. And so that becomes more of a, am I ready to retire? Am I ready to get out kind of thing? And I've seen some that are very happy and they're, thank goodness I'm out. I should have done this sooner. Others are, man, I can only play golf for so much. And
Yeah.
yes, and I mean this in with all due respect in the Talladega Nights kind of way, but yeah, I see my spouse more often now in retirement, kind of thing. So yeah, there's all kinds of things, and then the flip side of that, I get to spend more time with my grandkids, so it goes both ways. But so yes, there are those. We can talk about other things like what is the customer base? Is it concentrated? So really, what the focus today on is not so much the granular. These are the things you need to do, but it's more of, okay, are you ready? Is it a good time from a market perspective, from a buyer's perspective, to put yourself up on the market necessarily? So understand that that's kind of what we're discussing here, which is the outsider's view into your business versus the other way around, because we've talked about that a lot in prior sessions. So just some observations.
Yeah. It, we've talked about this a lot, but it's worth mentioning again. Simon Sinek and, the golden circle of why. What's your why? If you can really get very honest with yourself, and only you can get honest with yourself and peel back the onion, and you may need somebody from the outside to help facilitate like that process, because when you get really deep about what is the issue and why are you looking at this or that, that reveals a ton. But it's so hard sometimes to look at that because we get captivated by the noise or the tyranny of the urgent or the pain of this or that, and we aren't really honest about the why. And I think that's really super important. For this client of ours that we were talking about, his why was he was just burned out and he had debt and he was carrying a bunch of stuff that he didn't want to carry on a day-to-day standpoint. As soon as you move some of that stuff off, and then the company started humming even more, the debt falls off. And I remember it was within 6 months, he said, Gary, I can't wait to go to work on Monday every weekend. And he was like dragging by Wednesday, before. It's just so cool to see that, So anyway, I think your point is really well taken, Adam, and that is in market volatility and lots of chaos and uncertainty, which is prevalent. It's really easy to get scared or move into a fear-based decision, and that's not necessarily good. The other thing that I think is also important, you touched on it, and Jack, I'd love to have you and Adam, both of you guys weigh in on this, but let's go back to the multiples. So I was talking to a guy that owns a roofing company, good roofing company, really good one. And, he's citing people that are doing 12-time multiples. And, but then he has somebody that was willing to give him a 5 to 6-time multiple. And he's like, I want the 12-time multiple. And it's easy at the golf, at your golf club to be talking, shop. Oh yeah, well, old Jim over there, yeah, he got a 15x, man. And well, gosh, I'm just chopped liver. They're talking about 3x, or whatever. Industries are different, and you better know, right? Jack, what are some of the smallest versus some of the biggest ones that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean it's the range of okay, single digit, you know, 3, 4, 5, all the way to low double digits, I think. But it is interesting you say that because I mean, I think people who have listened in before know I'm kind of a student of psychology and I like to know kind of what's really going on behind the scenes. And one of those things in relation to multiples is people get fixated on numbers and, you know, kind of like the count on Sesame Street. It's like 1, 2, 3, and you know, you're building up this anticipation of getting to 10. And you know, it's just, but I would say for someone who is seeing a range of multiples to figure out why. I mean, obviously it's in the eye of the beholder, and they're using a lot of objective data, but you know, what is the subjectivity and you know, why would someone choose 5.5 versus 6 or 7? I mean, there's so much subjectivity that is involved in determining whether it's going to be 5.5 or 6. Again, a lot of objective data that goes into determining those things, because ultimately what you're really doing is, you know, even though it's a math problem, you're looking at what the end result is with the number that you're going to pay and how you're going to pay it. And what you don't know when someone says one number versus another number is that, you know, is part of that an earnout, is part of that, you know, holdback, is part of that. So where, you know, when you take earnings and you multiply it and you get to a number that is the potential purchase price, you know, what are the parameters of earning that that purchase price? What is the payout period over the course of time? You know, so yeah, obviously the best deal would be something along the lines of, okay, high multiple, mostly cash out the door at closing. And, you know, the worst would be where you leave a lot more on the line. I had to basically earlier this week tell a client that I don't want to, I don't want to impose my thoughts on the business deal that you're proposing to get into, but it seems like you're leaving a lot of risk on getting that money. So I said, if you're perfectly fine with taking the cash purchase price and the holdback that you'll likely get and be happy with that's the purchase price and the rest of it is gravy, that's great. I knew that wasn't because there was so much put into down the road as far as what is going to be paid. And then interestingly, a multiple was used as an in-between. Imagine the scenario where you have an investor that says, okay, we're going to buy out your company, and you have an earnout and this other money that you will get down the road, but you don't get any of that other money until we get all of our investment back with a multiple on it. So now they're basically saying is that we need to have like the subset of earnings within what we've put into the company and to get paid that back before you get your first dollar on what on the installment part of, and it was an earnout essentially. And it was hefty, hefty, hefty. And even though the client felt like, okay, yeah, I shouldn't be a problem, I said that you're making a lot of assumptions that they're going to run the business like you did. And, you know, everything is going to continue onward in the same fashion as it did under your leadership. And so, you know, getting back to the multiples, the purchase price in that scenario was based upon, and the multiple was based upon the fact that there was a lot of contingent purchase price that was put on the back end. So of course the multiple is going to be higher because there's less risk. And so you need to take all those things into consideration. So to talk about comparing multiples on, you know, at the 19th hole is just not really a good way to do a comparative analysis.
Yeah, and I'll kind of echo Jack's point that he just made there, that I don't think I've ever seen a double-digit multiple that was all cash, owner leaves tomorrow.
Mm-mm.
The
I haven't
only
either.
the only double-digit multiples that I've seen are, as Jack said, either owners staying, well, I mean, it's usually owner staying, there's an earnout, and it's kind of, I'm giving you a blah blah blah, blah multiple, but you're going to roll in 30% of that. So you didn't, part of that is just based on, well, I didn't actually get paid for 30% of the transaction, because now I'm part of the new organization and now I'm just a minority owner that works here. So well, it's so rare that I haven't ever seen it, so those low double digit multiples are always, they didn't get that. It's very much I won in Vegas, like for 1 hour before I then lost it all. The other thing that I wanted to hit on too, that was also, hey, is it time to sell? I mean, the caveat that I would make to, hey, I do need to start thinking, I really should be thinking about it, outside of burnout, is if I'm not thinking about it by the time I'm 55 or 60, by thinking about it, I'm not talking about like, yeah, well, I thought about it. Nah, it's gone. No, like actually taking some action. Like I need to start taking some action on it at probably 55, no later than 60. Like even if I have all intentions of working into, my 70s, you just don't know, what life change is going to throw at you at that age. So I do feel like, kind of no matter what, 55 to 60 is sort of the age that, okay, I'm leaning towards being irresponsible if I'm not actually taking some action, on this now. And it's sort of like, when I go back to irresponsible, I've got, I don't think my parents listen to this either, by the way. But there's this piece of property in Edmond, Oklahoma, that is that's it's in between my step uncle, who is living on my grandmother's old property, which is where my dad and his brother grew up in high school, and then my dad and my stepmom's property, and it's good. So downtown Edmond, very prime real estate. It backs up to a frontage road that, they get offers all the time to develop it. And, the jointly owned piece is like this 3-acre sliver, of property that you could probably build a couple houses on, or you could sell it to a developer back in the back. And, I'm the executor of my parents' estate, but I haven't seen any details. And they're like, well, what, we've got that property taken care of. I've only given them one request. Do not leave the ownership of that property in question, because that will turn into a shit show. And I know we took care of it. I'm like, well, how did you take care of it? Well, you'll get it along with your stepbrothers, along with your 3 cousins. I'm like, that is not resolving this problem. That's just creating a nightmare, for me to have to do it. Because right now it's got 2 owners, my dad and his brother. We're about to go to 7. Something happens. I haven't even talked to some of those guys in years. I don't even know how to get hold of them, to do anything with it. So, in other words, I guess I'll be making it Jake, Eva, and Miles's problem, along with my stepbrother's kid. You get the point behind this, meaning like, hey, it'll be taken care of, family. Look, nobody wants to inherit your business with no instructions on what the hell to do with it. That's what I'm talking about with financial irresponsibility, for not at least doing something about it. You may have intentions of working until your 70s, but maybe your family did not have intentions, of you working into your 70s, especially when it's not needed. Yeah, nobody, yeah. I guess, how many times have you heard on the deathbed, Gary, somebody says, I wish I would have put in, another year of work.
Yeah, no.
Still
waiting for that one.
I should have worked harder.
I mean, I've had to have, I wouldn't say a morbid conversation, but kind of a reality check, which is I had a client who shared his 10-year plan, which would have taken him into his 60s. And it was more like, okay, I'll get to those things down the road, but I have more important things to deal with now. And to your point about, being in your 50s and kind of thinking about it, I, went through and I said, all right, tell me more about your children. Tell me more about your grandchildren. let's assume that something happens to you within a year, and according to your plan, you have all these other things to do within the next 9 years that don't get done. And now, is your family taken care of? Is the business sellable? Is it in a good place? What is your plan? So again, not to scare people into thinking that, okay, I have to have the plan, but you need to be thinking about it and thinking and not, and we've had this discussion before as well, which is, it's not necessarily, if you're not, if you don't think you're going to sell anytime soon, you still need to go through the motions to put yourself in the best position. As you said, Adam, things change, circumstances change, sometimes for the better. Maybe it's an opportunity to do something, and you're like, okay, to go somewhere where you haven't been and do some hobby becomes your new job and you're ready to sell. And we've all had those as well, which is, I wasn't intending on selling, but I have this opportunity. And then, hopefully they're in a good place because they've been thinking about it versus like, oh crap, I got to get my act together really quickly or else I'm going to miss this other opportunity. So again, it's not always about you. Sometimes it's about the people around you that you're doing things for.
That is exactly right. If you care, if you if you really care about them, you can't hide that one. I agree. Well, the gallery has been kind of quiet today. We've had a nice crew on here today, but anything before we sign off today, anything that's on people's minds? Half Retire by Jim. I don't know how, Mulhausen. That's how I'm going to say.
That's a book, I believe. Right,
Yeah.
Jamie?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
I've not
Half
read that,
Retire.
but I'm gonna have to take a look at it.
Yeah, I'll add that to my reading list as well.
Thank you, Jamie. Good to have you on here. And the Karnak reference woke up Jim. Uh, he said he assumed it was a Johnny Carson reference. Oh, yes. Anything from the gallery before we sign off today? Well, all right. So week 212 is in the books. We'll put it up on the BGWCPA YouTube channel later on today, and Shoemaker has their own. It'll be up later on today as well. So I think is when you do it, maybe, but that's usually the case. Good to see you guys again.
Yeah.
Any parting shots before we sign off?
I'm in mourning that my Tar Heels didn't get further, and my daughter's Wolf Pack didn't get further, and then Wake got knocked out a couple weeks ago. But yeah, so I don't know what I'm gonna do at night now. I mean, basketball's done, right? Hockey's done, right? Didn't I think that is done? So
Yeah, hockey's done,
yeah,
but you still got this Cleveland City. Cleveland City Stars, the Charlotte FC.
yes, yes,
You
yes.
know, so I didn't see if they won last night. Next game is Saturday the 22nd. I was there a week ago on Saturday. It was hot as blazes. But it was a fun game because the good guys beat DC United. So there you go.
Oh, and looks like that game 6 is this weekend. So, okay. Wow. I guess I should have watched that game more closely. I kind of tuned out. But okay. Excellent. And yeah, CFC I think were winning and then they ended up tying.
Oh, tie with Orlando. Oh
Yeah.
well. Better than losing, but
Which is why my friends who don't like soccer don't like soccer because it's like, okay, 0-0, 1-1. You have to appreciate the art of the game.
that's true. It is the beautiful game.
Yes.
All right, guys. Well, signing off. Don't get burned out. If you are burned out, call somebody who can help you.
All right. See you
All
guys.
right.
Thanks.
See you
Bye.
guys.
All right.
Bye
Bye.
bye.